Anyway, I need a motion to approve our minutes from our last meeting on February 22nd. See a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. And Cameron, is Cameron around or? All right. Yes. So if we are going to be voting on some things today, and if you want to vote, then and you haven't signed in outside, then please do that. We just need to have your initials by the sign-off sheet to be able to know that you're here and voting. I'll give one report before Cameron gets up here. So House Bill 85 was a bill to preclude cities from using the power of eminent domain to condemn park space. And that's something that is of concern to me, particularly because while we didn't actually use eminent domain, we actually had it in our back pocket, and were able to secure property for a city-owned facility called Mill Creek Common, which will provide open space and park space for as many as 3,000 new units of housing that are going up around there. And that bill died on the House floor today. It passed out of committee by a close vote, but it died on the House floor. So and that's a good thing when cities are asked to plan for and zone for growth, and particularly high density housing. To not be able to put park space or open space in those communities just will make them unlivable and kind of defeat all of the planning that we're trying to do around Wasatch Choice 2050 to preserve the livability of our state as we grow. So anyway, thanks to the House members who killed that bill. Okay, so I'm gonna, since Carson's, where's Carson? I'm going to skip Cameron and have you talk to us about housing affordability amendments, unless you want to. All right, that's the way to get going, is to get threatened to pass Cameron.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Welcome everybody to the last LPC of the legislative session. Yeah. Yes. Amen. Amen. So we still have 4.5 business days to go, which in legislative time is like 4.5 months to go. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts. We have several bills on here that are still being actively negotiated, including House Bill 462. And we invited Representative Waldrop to come back and to give an update on House Bill 462 and to be able to answer some questions about what is still to come. But again, I want to thank Representative Waldrop publicly for his collaborative approach through the Commission on Housing Affordability and through the last few weeks, as we've been working on what has become House Bill 462 and what will still be House Bill 462 over the next few days. So Representative Waldrop, thank you for your partnership. I'll let you say a few words.
Thank you, Cam. I'll do this again so the people online can hear. Notice me wearing a mask. I was just telling Mark Johnson, he's threatening to tell people I have COVID. I have what's called lesser COVID. Used to be called the common cold, but now we call it lesser COVID. So I got a little scratchy throat, but wearing a mask so that people don't freak out. Thanks for your good work. We ended up taking 462 to the Natural Resources Committee this morning because of some procedural issues that happened on our bill on Friday. So fortunately, we got our natural resources friends to agree that it was good to pass. And so we got in there, I think, 10-2. And it's now on the House third reading calendar. We have one substitute that will come. It'll correct a few things in the base bill, and maybe I'll talk about those really quickly. We're going to take out the repeal of the not well language. The repeal, we're going to take out the repeal of allowing you to do your jobs. So we were going to try and allow you to do your jobs, but we're no longer going to try to allow you to do your jobs anymore. Sorry. But that comes with a commitment from the Property Rights Coalition and the League to get us something next year. So over the interim, Cal Musselman's going to be working on it and create something that we can all rely on statewide. Because right now, overnight rentals it's a hit and miss disaster across the state, right? Some communities have no issues. Some communities have major issues. Where I live, there's major issues. And if you don't live in one of those communities, you don't understand what the issues are. I've got neighbors calling me all the time. Hey, there was a party last night, that used to be a quiet residential street. And now, I got one party house on my street that every weekend, explodes, and I call the police, and then the police get tired of coming after a while because it's just another party. So we have to address that issue. The not well language swung the pendulum way too far over here. Previous to that, it was probably far over here. So we need to find that resting place for that pendulum. And that's the commitment from the parties. So we'll be working that issue over the interim to try and come up with something that works for all parties. The other change is going to be on the funding mechanisms. We didn't get prioritized for the 100 million we were asking for on both the private activity bond front and the rural housing initiative. I will say this about rural housing, and this is something that I'm not sure I actually have an answer to. I've talked with the 7 counties and the 6 counties. What's the other? Is it 5, 6, and 7? Yeah, 5 and 6. Yeah. So I've talked with representatives from those groups, and they are working on creating a process where they can come to us with very specific requests saying, hey, this community is ready to do X, Y, and Z. So instead of the legislature going, hey, we want you to do this, or we want you to do that, or we want you to start planning on this or that, we want those rural communities to come to us and say, we are ready to do ABC. And that's a lot more powerful for us to get whatever funding's required, and also whatever changes in statute are needed in order to enable those things. Because one thing I recognize that the housing issues on the Wasatch Front are totally different than the housing issues in rural Utah. And we have to deal with them both. And we have to deal with them both independently and intelligently and intentionally. The stationary plan piece that's coming out, we've had Andrew Gruber and Miranda working very hard on this with Cam, and there's Christina. We've got our property rights folks. We've been working really, really hard. And we're very, very close, I think, to a consensus bill that will allow our local communities to maintain their control, to do their job, which is to plan their cities. They'll be planned with an eye to the state goals in mind. But again, these are goals that the cities have already bought into, because in order to get that station there, you've already bought into that plan of having a station there and having that be a hub within your community. So we just need to codify that, and then and not have, again, I talked about this in committee this morning. We do not want to be like California, Massachusetts, Oregon, Washington, or Arizona, who are all going to zoning by right with literally zero local control. That is a disaster. That is throwing up your hands, surrendering, and saying, yeah, are you applauding for them or us? No, I mean, that is an absolute disaster. And I can't talk about that often enough, because we cannot end up there. Those states have completely given up on doing anything intelligent or intentional. And we're way better than that. We can be intelligent, we can be intentional, and we can solve our problems. And that's what I've seen coming from the meetings I've had with your executive committee, the meetings I've had with Cam, as I've talked to many of you individually. We want to respect those traditional roles of our communities, having representation within that community that drives a community's issues, that drives a community's results and the direction of a community. But we have to do it a little bit differently now because we're out of land. We used to be able to land our way out of these problems. We're no longer able to do that. We're now at a point where we have to smart our way out of these problems and create good density. And we have some great examples of that in our state. And so the intent is that with providing, and this is the other thing that we need to mention, this bill will also provide sufficient financial support to our AOGs that they will be able to provide technical assistance as needed to everybody who needs it. This is not unfunded as a mandate. This is completely funded as a mandate. which is really, really important to me because I don't want to turn you guys loose and pretend like we've created a solution when all we've done is given you an empty bucket and said, go find money to fill this. That creates another problem for you. We want to solve those problems. So that's been the intent. That's where we are. Kim, I don't know if there's anything else I need to cover. We can open up for questions if you'd like to do that. But I just, again, I said this last time I was here, you got a great team here. And I can't tell you how great it is to be able to have that discussion we had and say, we're going to agree. We're going to work through this and we're going to get to an agreement and we're going to agree. And Andrew's been on that, and Miranda and Kim, and I've done that. And it's really interesting because my colleagues are still not, they don't believe it. I mean, like, it's kind of funny because they really don't believe it. They're waiting for the fireworks to come. They're waiting for the, the bombshells to drop and, oh, everything's going to blow up. It's not going to happen. And you owe that debt of gratitude to yourselves for supporting your leadership on this board, and also Cameron, but also to those who have participated in the process. Everybody has just said, let's dig in and let's get solutions on the table. And that's what we've been able to do. So thank you all very, very much.
So Representative, this is a two-way street, and I want to thank you for engaging with us. And I think actually this is kind of a watershed legislature in that regard, because I feel like we've, in most cases, we've been able to work on good policy together rather than at loggerheads. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Before he walks out, are there any final questions for Representative Waldrop?
We're all good.
No, and again, before you walk out, let me just make sure everyone is clear on the process of these next 4.5 days. Okay, because this is important. And in a minute, we'll talk through the substance of the bill that's been public for a week. But this is really critical to know, because this is in part why we were in committee for 90 minutes this morning. House Bill 462, that's the magic number. When we met last Tuesday, the bill was not yet out. So we presented to you what we knew was going to be in the bill based on the draft we had seen the night before. On his birthday, actually. He spent 2 hours of his birthday on a Zoom call with me going line by line through a 100-page bill. So
Best president ever.
right,
Best
right,
president
yeah,
ever.
right. So sorry about that. There's always next year. So we knew it was coming. It just wasn't numbered yet. So we presented that to you. The station area plan piece has been negotiated. We hope to have language done in a matter of a few hours, whether that's today or tomorrow, but have the station area plan done. We did a town hall last week that went into a lot of detail, and we had over 70 people on that call. We'll talk about it again here in a second. The station area plan piece will be substituted into 462. And 462 will also have a few technical changes that he referenced, including we're still working out the internal accessory dwelling unit language within the bill. So the bill passed today out of committee. It'll be substituted on the House floor. That's the plan, is to substitute it on the House floor with language about the stationary plans in it. And all bills have to be out of their respective chambers by tomorrow, close of business. So House Bill 462 has to pass the House by tomorrow afternoon. There's a chance that the sub won't be ready yet, in which case it will be substituted in the Senate and then have to be brought back for concurrence. But we will keep you appraised in the daily emails about all the process pieces. And as soon as language comes out, we'll be sending it to whoever wants to see it so people can look at it, because this isn't the type of thing like, hey, I'll look at this in a couple of days when the language comes out. It's here it is, look at it now, get us feedback now, because everything's got to be done by Friday at midnight. Is that a fair assessment of
Very good
the madness
assessment,
ahead? Okay. Well, Representative, thank you very much. Thanks for stopping by. I know a couple of our building guys will be walking with you to talk about internal ADUs. So thank you for that. I'll circle back with you later this afternoon. So with that being said, let's. That looks like my slide from last week. So as a reminder, this is actually one of the key data points that we've been using over and over and over again at the record amounts of housing permits that cities have issued. And I'm in my testimony this morning, I referenced Saratoga Springs and the 20,000 plus entitled units that are not yet permitted, that don't even show up on the data about the record-setting number of housing units from last week or from last year. So this is part of the foundation of House Bill 462, is it's going to require more of cities. Okay, there is no doubt about that. We will be doing our training during the spring with all of your planners to help make sure everyone understands some of these requirements are going to be changing. It's going to be a lot more work for cities on the planning side and on the reporting side, okay? But the data that will come from that work is going to help us complete the narrative in a very powerful way. And stationary plans are another piece of that. Currently, there are 18 stationary plans in existence, and it's an optional tool based on the current definition. Over the course of the next couple of years, as more and more plans that are currently in existence turn into stationary plans, that will also help us complete the narrative up here about how cities are maximizing the planning around transit while still making sure the decisions are being made locally at City Hall. So we acknowledge it's going to be more work, but the long-term benefit is powerful. So this has not changed from what we presented last week. Right? So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time walking through it because we went through all of this in detail last week, even though the bill was not yet out, around the moderate income housing piece. The one piece in red will be one of the additions to the menu. And this came from a request from Salt Lake County. And then there were some tweaks to some of the wording and the wording therein. So the substance is going to be the same for the moderate income housing plan piece. There'll just be a few tweaks in the substitute. Are there any questions about the moderate income housing plans, who has to do them, what it looks like, et cetera, that people want to bring up now? Carson's gone. Liam, anything online? Okay. One thing I'll emphasize that Representative Waldron mentioned, he gets stopped by his colleagues all the time on this bill. Every single day of the session, I've had legislators or others ask about asking about state minimum density and having the state mandate density. Like, it comes up every day, and this bill has been really powerful to be able to say, no, we're not going down that path because we're going down this alternative that respects the role of local governments. But even today, this morning, I've had conversations with people saying that Representative Waldrop's bill should mandate certain levels of density everywhere in the state or in the urban areas, et cetera. And to his credit, he's been saying, no, we're taking this collaborative approach. Okay, this piece is oh, go ahead, Liam. Well, that's unfortunate. Can you do something about that? Yeah, that's a good question on the training piece. So once the session ends, we start what we call our spring training. And so we'll be doing Zoom town halls. We'll be out on the road. We'll have conferences in April. So there'll be a lot of training opportunities really starting in mid-March through the late spring. Okay, now this piece is still being negotiated, okay? And we know this piece has been problematic, and there's been a lot of back and forth. In fact, I mentioned that he was walking out with some of our building folks who are still trying to work this out. And this is building off of House Bill 82 last year. The current version of the bill inadvertently wipes out what we negotiated in House Bill 82 last year on internal ADUs. The key word is inadvertent, okay? It just hasn't been subbed yet. So what we are trying to get back to is ensuring those policy concessions that we negotiated into the internal ADU bill last year still apply, while recognizing the representatives' concerns about potential challenges for older internal accessory dwelling units to come up into compliance with the building code and other things. So he's been trying to get to, for lack of a better term, a safe harbor. But again, the current language of the bill inadvertently goes beyond a safe harbor and undermines House Bill 82. So there's language going back and forth on that piece right now. It does, in the bill currently, and it will in the sub, it does remove the ability of cities to charge impact fees for internal ADUs that are currently in existence. And we've had a lot of back and forth on that piece. In fact, when we presented to the league board back in December, the concepts that we knew were coming, that was one of the pieces that the league board was opposed to. There were other pieces they said they were supportive of. And as we've been going back and forth, counting votes, et cetera, unfortunately, we think that is just a concession we're going to have to swallow politically in light of our discussions with other legislators. So know that that language is in House Bill 462, and we're trying to get the safe harbor pieces correct and make sure that a preemption around impact fees for internal ADUs does not inadvertently create a prohibition or a preemption on impact fees for other types of accessory dwelling units. Is there a question? No, okay. Yes, sir. Yeah. Hold on. Is there a microphone somewhere? Da-da, da-da. Yeah, you're on. It's more for them to hear. Oh, hold on. Never mind.
I think you said internal ADUs that are existing now, it prohibits those impact fees, or is it any internal?
That's the
accessory
piece that's
dwelling?
still being finalized, is whether it's internal ADUs as of a certain date or just internal ADUs in general are not assessed impact fees. And as we did outreach to cities, we got some really interesting data about what cities do or don't do in the internal ADU space. And one of the clear lines was internal ADUs versus other types of ADUs that have additional connections versus a family that moves into the basement of an existing house. So again, lots of back and forth on that piece as well. We're trying to limit the preemption as much as possible, but there's very little support up here for our original position, which was just to leave the impact fee piece out of it. Question online?
Okay. Okay, this is from Stephen Shields. It says, how does the bill hope to keep units at a price equal to the 50% or 80% of AMI? Market demands will drive the prices of homes, not the cost of construction. How long will the homes have to be affordable? Will these homes only be affordable at planning, or must they sell for a certain price? The reserved language is vague.
So council member, are you referencing the point of the Mountain Land Authority language? Just see if he writes that in the chat room. Because if
Yes.
he's referencing that, okay. So that only applies to the housing within the state, on the state property. The inclusionary housing language doesn't, even though there's inclusionary housing language that's in the bill right now, that's going to be stripped out in the substitute, and this inclusionary housing piece will only apply on that state-owned land. And the thought process there is one of the biggest drivers of housing costs is the land cost. In this case, the state of Utah owns the land, and that should be able to reduce some of the cost of that land. And if it's state land, then having the mandatory inclusionary housing piece makes some sense. We've been negotiating an inclusionary housing definition that'll be in another bill that I'll come to in a second that does not have mandates in it. It's an incentive-based approach, but that only applies to the state-owned land within the point of the Mountain Land Authority. Okay. Any other questions online, Liam or Hannah? Okay. Okay. Then on the appropriations front, you can see that even though the private activity bond language and the rural housing language did not make the cut, from a day-to-day perspective in City Hall, all of the asks that the league board made did make the cut. The league board asked for addition. Actually, not all of these came from the league board. So I'll clarify what came from the league board. So the training language and let me back up again. Technical assistance language is what the league board requested. We received the technical assistance dollars. There'll likely be additional technical assistance dollars that will come through another bill. The league board also prioritized the marketing and outreach campaign, which personally, I hate that terminology. It's one thing we're actually going to try to fix it as well. Because really what this needs to be is a public engagement effort around growth. So it can't just be marketing. It's actually got to be a real live conversation with, Andrew, you're looking at me funny. Yeah, I know, but you gotta use a mic. I know, there it is.
Sorry,
Oh,
there
there you
were,
go.
hi, there were two different
Please state
requests.
your name for the
Yeah.
record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Andrew Gruber of Wasatch Front Regional Council. There were two separate appropriations requests for conversations around growth. One of them, which was recommended in the governor's budget, endorsed by the Economic Opportunity Commission, supported by Mayors Ramsey and Mayor Silverstein, Chair of the League and Chair of WFRC, was $1 million through GOPB for a statewide conversation around growth issues. That was funded, prioritized by EAC. Separate from that, in HB 462, there was $3 million in the bill for a marketing campaign aimed at businesses around housing issues. I don't think that is moving forward. That is a separate item. That is not prioritized by EAC. And the funding elements that are in HB 462 right now, not all of those are going forward. So there may be a little uncertainty about that specifically, but the 1 million that the league asked for and has supported is going forward. Okay.
Perfect. So the budget was finalized on Friday. We're going to talk through appropriations here in a second, just a general for you. But this was really the first year that the league board actively sought general appropriations in these different divisions, and this being one of them. Okay, then I mentioned this was my slide from last week. So let me quickly scan it to make sure it's still accurate. Perfect. Okay, good. Phew. The stationary plan language, we got a draft copy of the first part of the stationary plan language late last night. Okay, so that gives you a sense of how things are moving quickly here. So we mentioned it to a few people. If your city wants to provide feedback on that protected language, Representative Waldrop has authorized us to share it with cities that have transit that would be affected. So if you're online, just drop a note in the chat box for Liam. If you're here in person, just grab a league staffer, because we're trying to collect feedback on that protected piece, gathering all of it so we can get it ready for a sub tomorrow. That's what I was about to say. So last week we did a town hall and had about 70 people on it on Wednesday, where we walked through everything that we anticipated that was coming. We were just waiting for a specific draft. That was Wednesday. Then on Thursday, we spent probably 6 hours with attorneys and planners from multiple cities that have transit stops, finessing the language that was going to be going into the draft. All of that was given to Ledge Research, and then we got our first copy late last night. Okay, so there have been quite a few eyes that were working on it before it got to this point. But again, if your city wants to see the language, grab a league staffer, make a note of it in the chat box so we can get that piece out. It's only one piece of two pieces that will be part of the stationary plan. So it's right now, the language is just about what a stationary plan is and how it operates. The piece that is not yet finished being drafted, but Andrew and I have a meeting right after LPC, is to work through the changes to the referendum statutes and other remaining pieces. Because one of the key concepts here is that once Midvale City adopts a stationary plan and the accompanying zoning to implement the station area plan, that in turn would actually trigger heightened referendum thresholds. And the idea there is to be able to give more certainty to the city and to property owners that once you've gone through this impressive effort to plan around transit, that you've got the higher thresholds to prevent against that referendum. Ideally, the referendum never happens because one of the requirements of the stationary plan is public engagement. So ideally, we get in front of concerns at the beginning, and then once you adopt it, you've got those heightened referendum thresholds, and the zoning gets put in place, and the property gets developed accordingly. The other key piece, and this came up in the committee this morning, is that we are trying to ensure that cities like a West Valley or a Salt Lake or a Sandy that already have some type of plan in place, even if it's not called a station area plan, can build off of the plan they already have and integrate that into the stationary plan requirements And ideally, it's actually a pretty fast process to say the Cairns plan in Sandy City checks all the boxes. The plan gets certified as a station area plan, the referendum thresholds kick in, and you're off and running. And you could be certified by both Sandy City and then by the Metropolitan Planning Organization, WFRC, or MAG, depending on where you are. And then it all fits into the SB 34 architecture, which I suppose going forward, we're going to have to call the HB 462 infrastructure. Okay, as I am looking at this room, I think I have exhausted the patience of the room on this bill. It's only 117 pages, but are there any questions about where things are or what's going to happen on this bill in the next few days? Mr. Hill.
Does the legislation specify when the plan must be adopted relative to a new station? For
Yes.
example, there are many that are coming but haven't been approved yet. What is if you could summarize that real fast?
So let's just take Bountiful with future BRT stations. You would need to do stationary planning as part of that process of getting those new stations. And in general, there's going to be a deadline of a certain year. Right now it's 2025, but it's still being finalized for all the stationary plans for current stations to be in effect, with some caveats for cities that have a lot of stations, like Salt Lake City, for example. But then there's a 12-month window that once the trigger happens to have to do a stationary plan, that within that 12 months, you have to do your visioning, your planning, and the zoning in order to integrate or to implement the plan. So stay tuned. And this is part of the piece, like we've tried to delineate between stations that are already in existence and stations that are still to come, and delineate between Tracks and Frontrunner and BRT, because you're going to have a few differences in how those roll out. But the key piece here is the California model and other state models is basically we are mandating certain density around transit. The House Bill 462 / stationary plan model is Bountiful City is getting this BRT line. You need to proactively plan around it. Here's the general objectives. You need to coordinate with the MPO, but you're still, unintended, driving the bus. You're still zoning and setting the plan in place.
So Gary, you would have to have your station area plan completed when the station opens for a new station.
So back to the ADUs, that's where I'm getting most of my questions and concerns. So again, we anticipate will be prohibited from assessing an impact fee on an internal ADU. Not sure exactly where the line will start and stop on point in time. Maybe it's for future ones, maybe it's for existing, but we'll see where that goes. But they were totally, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is where the definitions have been getting tricky. I told you how it was inadvertently drafted a certain way. An internal ADU in existence as of, say, today is different than a new build that has an internal ADU contemplated in it. And that's been part of the back and forth of, how should you classify internal ADUs as maybe in somebody's basement for 40 years versus a new build that is being built to include an IADU, and that's kind of part of the contemplation of the bill.
But we anticipate full freedom to assess impact fees on external ADUs.
Yeah, that's been one of our main points, is that those are fundamentally different.
And that we are required to require a business license for any ADU.
Yeah, that's been a piece of back and forth. So the original version, before it even came into public language, would have actually preempted our ability to have either permits or building or business licenses, which was a huge piece of our negotiation last year on House Bill 82, is that we wanted the ability to still be able to require a business license or a permit. So the reason the language currently states shall require a license or a permit comes back to the data collection side of 462. We want to know how many of these there are, because that helps complete the narrative about how cities are planning for housing.
And that's kind of the whole piece of ADUs that we just covered right there.
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep, and the grandfathering clause on the building and health codes.
So just as I look at this 462, there's a couple things that just jump out. One, MPO oversight. I'm just not a fan of that. I appreciate what is trying to happen with this legislation, but again, I don't know that us sending our plans as a city to an MPO to give it its blessing really makes any difference in the world. And I realize this may be a political issue more than anything. Sorry, Andrew. We just don't think that that's the appropriate role. The next thing that is a concern for me is as we look at this, our city has already invested and vested property with a tremendous amount of density, especially where we're planning for these future transit routes and things to go through our city. They don't exist because UDOT's not out there or UTA is not out there, but we've put those pieces in place. As I read this bill, it says, oh, and in addition to whatever the zoning is there, you need to rezone to allow for more, whether it's some of the other components to this bill or whether it's this. And my concern is if we've already vested it with 56 units to the acre, it doesn't need to go to 70. It doesn't need to go higher than that. And so I'm wondering if there's floors or ceilings on some of these things. Now, again, we understand that this is what's coming. We support the overall direction. We're not going to take a position in opposition, but I think we need to ask ourselves the question, if there's already a tremendous amount of density that's vested in these areas, when you see the language that's been proposed that says you're going to rezone, well, there may not be a need to rezone. And there's no guardrails that are saying what targets you have to hit. So I'm a little concerned about those types of things. Again, things that can get cleaned up in the future, but those are just some of the thoughts. And then overall, and you've told me that the bill's going to get amended to take out some percentages. There's some language that specifically gave required percentages for future affordable housing and things. Well, of a city that's 35% built out, for us to mandate 10% of all of our future housing product will be affordable housing in some of the other component parts of this bill, it becomes a little troublesome for us, because that means that in the long run, we might have a disproportionate amount compared to the rest of the state. So if those issues are corrected, I think these things can be fixed, but there are elements to this that we all need to be very mindful of that could have some detrimental impacts in the long term, because not all of us are the same. And we appreciate your efforts. We appreciate the last minute nature of this. But again, those are items that we'd still like to see resolved as we continue to move forward on these types of bills.
So thanks, Mark. I want to respond to the first thing that you said about rule by MPOs. So that remember, I guess, that where this started with Representative Waldup and others in the legislature was to have DWS do that review and have the hammer and the ability to approve everything that we did. And we felt that it was not appropriate and would be a worse threat to local control than what we have been able to negotiate. The Property Rights Coalition was adamant that they wanted more of a hammer with the state. And so where this concept came from is we understand that the MPOs work with each of our municipalities in planning efforts anyway. That's what they do. They provide funding for that and technical assistance. And then the second thing is that these are peer organizations. I mean, our peers, the MPOs are us, okay? So yeah, you may have to convince other members of the regional council or however you're structured that your plan is adequate. The idea is that the MPO provides technical assistance and works with you to make sure that at the end of the day, the plan satisfies the requirements of the statute. And this be I guess what I would say is like more of a velvet hammer because it's peer led. Okay, but we weren't able to get away completely from some kind of review. And bottom line of it is having your MPO give a recommendation to DWS, we felt was better and a better compromise than just having DWS do that.
And I appreciate that, but philosophically, you've added a layer of government. And again, this is the same MITA concept. We've inserted another layer of government with oversight over us. And yes, it is our peer group, but what happens if Seth in Spanish Fork doesn't like our plan? Does Seth have the ability, or Seth's organization have the ability to hold that up? And I realize this is more of a philosophical thing. I don't know that I'll ever philosophically agree with you. A velvet glove is still a hammer.
I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just asking you to say, would you rather have DWS do that or the MPO do that?
Well, clearly I'd rather have none of it, but thank you.
Mark, I'll answer the other two questions that you raised. As I mentioned, there were still technical cleanups that needed to happen in this bill, and you actually hit two of them. So first, one thing that we've asked for within the menu items is making it clear that if a city has a plan in place, but maybe didn't put it in place during that 12-month period of time, but maybe they put it in place 2 years ago, that you can still get credit for what you've already done there. So that way, as you're reporting to DWS as part of that annual report, you would say, I'll just use you 56 units to the acre and say, we aren't going to rezone this area because we've already zoned it, we've already entitled it, and here's what we've done in this space, and that is the implementation of the menu item. Because ultimately that's what we're going for, and Rome wasn't built in a day and Saratoga wasn't built in a day. So we want to make sure it's clear that in those annual reports that you're able to take credit for the good work you're doing, which then coming back to the overall data collection piece, we want to be able as your representatives to, in the aggregate, show the good work that is being done. And right now, despite the good work of DWS, there are enough fundamental flaws in how the report was built and how the data is being collected that there's a whole lot of work at the end of the year that doesn't really help us. And when I say help us, I'm just talking to us in general as policymakers. Then the third point was on the inclusionary zoning language. Some of that's being stripped out, as I mentioned before, and there'll be language that will clarify that inclusionary housing has to be done on an incentive or development agreement basis rather than on the mandatory basis. And one of the menu items that's currently public said a city could basically mandate inclusionary zoning. So that's kind of come out, and instead you'll have that language that clarifies the sandbox for inclusionary housing. Like I said, a lot of moving parts on these bills right now. Any final questions on 462? Liam, and recognizing, I know we started late. This is still the first bill.
Okay, I'm going to start first with a comment from Tani Barker. She said, "We appreciate the additional work that has been put into the language regarding the role of MPOs in response to our original concerns and are comfortable with the language as it stands." And then there was a question earlier, this was a little bit ago. Zachary Smallwood said, "Just to be clear, is it not both? It has to be a permit or a business license?"
So Zach from Murray, sorry, ask me that again.
He was saying it has to be a
Oh, no,
permit
no.
or a business license.
Yeah, there's an or. So if you need to do one or the other, but just that data point so we can see how many IADUs are there. And Tani, thank you for the comments. Okay. So our staff recommendation on this bill is that we support the bill with the acknowledgement it's going to be more work on cities. And there are a couple pills in there, Isaac, that we don't necessarily like, but that we support the bill. And this is really a point in time of all of the housing bills that are out there. SB 34 was a big deal. And then the last couple of years, there hasn't been much. This is building on SB 34. And we think it sets us up for long-term political and policy success if we support the bill, with the understanding that we're still negotiating several of these pieces, and we'll keep you updated in our daily emails. So that is our staff recommendation. My hope is that someone would actually make a motion, a standalone motion on this bill, as opposed to just waiting for staff for ratifications at the end. So that's one.
For a second?
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Okay, discussion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Perfect. One thing I should have mentioned at the top, make sure you've signed in. So, I mean, that was an easy vote, but as you saw last week, the count really matters. So if you haven't signed in person, please sign in so we can get the final tally. Likewise, online, sign in so we can get the final tally. Okay. And I'll quickly hit these other two. These actually will be quick, admittedly complicated. Okay, we presented to you about House Bill 416 a couple of weeks ago, and this was a line in the sand bill for us because to Mark's point about state oversight and velvet glove, what House Bill 416 was it was like 10 bats coming at cities, not the flying kind, like baseball bats. We took a hard no on that bill, said absolutely not. I met with the bill sponsor and others. Val Potter, who's been working for us, a former legislator, met with the bill sponsor, and we made it very clear that there was no negotiation on House Bill 416. To his credit, as we laid out the policy concerns, Representative Peterson said, okay, yep, I can see your concerns. And as a reminder, what that bill, oh yeah, it's up there, good, I don't have to rehash it, but it basically would have created a state oversight committee for any land use action in the state of Utah. And before you say to yourself, well, who would ever do this? Let me introduce you to our friends in Arizona, because they have a similar provision in state law in the state of Arizona. It's a bill that keeps me up at night. It was House Bill 1487. It actually passed the year I became director and has haunted me ever since, because it passed over the league opposition. It passed down there by one vote. It's a terrible bill that has short-circuited the ability of local government to be sovereign entities in the state of Arizona, okay? So anything that smells like that is of considerable concern, and House Bill 416 certainly smelled like that. Again, the bill sponsor said, look, I get reports from cities, or I get reports from builders who are frustrated with cities that they aren't following the law. And so his thought was, let's empower the Office of the Ombudsman to determine if cities are following the law in their land use ordinances. So it's a perfect example of how the bad stories make their way to the Capitol, and then the bad stories lead to legislation. Orem City reached out to Representative Peterson as well, so thank you, Orem City. And after all of us met with him, he never say never, but the feeling we got was he was not going to proceed with the bill. Now, the reason I say never is between now and Friday night at midnight, crazy things can happen. So it hasn't showed up on any committee agendas yet, but if it does, you'll get an action alert. If it somehow gets lifted to the floor, you'll get an action alert, because this is a very concerning bill and would be terrible precedent. Now come back over to House Bill 303. Our original, this was another one, hard line in the sand on House Bill 303, because it essentially created a brand new category of vesting land use rights. So we said absolutely not. The bill sponsor came back in consultation with multiple city attorneys and said, what I'm really trying to get to is enhanced notice. Can we get to yes on enhanced notice? So ultimately, this committee voted to go neutral on the enhanced notice piece last week. A lot happens in a week up here. So since that time, the second sub has come out, and the bill has gone from 1 page to 70 pages. Yes, it's right. Steve Mayor Caldwell doesn't have a poker face. His eyebrows went up, and he's like, "Wait, what?" Because that's certainly what happened on my phone. Is people saying, "What happened to this simple enhanced notice bill?" And it was because I hadn't had time to send text saying, "I know this is coming. It's okay," because the Land Use Task Force bill, which we have told you about over the last few months, the Land Use Task Force consensus bill, came out as House Bill 474 last week, and we're supportive of House Bill 474. But in order to make sure that that bill made it across the finish line, the bill sponsor took House Bill 474 and substituted it on top of House Bill 303. Okay, so yes, it's a 70-page bill. And in the process of merging them, there's still a couple of things. We have a meeting at 5:30 tonight to just make sure that pieces talk to each other. But that's why a bill that we were opposed to and then neutral on, we're now asking for a position of support on, and it has the same number because it's 3 different bills. And we'll be finalizing the negotiations tonight to make sure that as it's been moved over, it hits all the pieces that were negotiated over the last 8 months with multiple city attorneys and planners and league staff around the state. Yes, let's do a separate motion on that because it's complicated enough. I wanted to make sure that people understood where all those pieces came from.
So look for a motion for the committee to change its position on House Bill 303 from opposed to support.
Support after
After discussions at 5:30 tonight to clarify the remaining problems. Second? Okay, I see a second in the back. Thank you. So a motion and a second to change the league's position from opposed to support House Bill 303. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Let's move on then to homelessness, and this one, buckle your seatbelts. This one's going to be tricky. What time is it? Okay. So I'm going to ask our policy director, Molly Wheeler. Those of you in Salt Lake County are already aware, because we've got multiple meetings on this. And then we did a straw poll beforehand that I'm going to repeat. And then there's another question I had several people ask me about after we did that straw poll, that I'm also going to bring back to the group. So Molly, will you just take 2 minutes, get people up to speed on 440, and then I'll come back and ask that follow-up question.
Absolutely. Hi, can you hear me if I just stand like this? And we'll zoom in everything. Excellent. So HB 440 was subbed last week. There's two really key components that we've been looking at within this bill. The first is $5 million in ongoing money for the mitigation fund. That is money that goes to cities with HRCs throughout the state to help cover the costs that they have for having those shelters in their cities. With that, we worked with a lot of the stakeholders to create a formula that would dictate how that money is spread out amongst those cities, moving away from kind of the entitlement and grant system that existed previously. That is part of the bill that we were pretty active in negotiations with, and we are fans of as the league right now, I would say. The second part of the bill was a bit of a surprise to us, and we've been negotiating on that. And that is targeted specifically at Salt Lake County. It requires that there is an overflow plan within Salt Lake County and gives the Council of Mayors? Council of Governments, thank you, the power to essentially, or pardon me, the responsibility to find a temporary overflow shelter in the state by September, or pardon me, messing up big, in the county. If they do not, it triggers a fail-safe. The fail-safe has several provisions right now that we've been working on. One is a flex of existing shelters within the county. Those shelters would be the 2 shelters in Salt Lake City and the shelter in South Salt Lake. They would flex right now based on the second substitute to 50% of the fire code as established by the International Fire Code. It would also allow for a government preemption, or pardon me, a preemption in any government building throughout Salt Lake County. So it could happen in Sandy City, Cottonwood Heights, anything like that. Any state facility could be preempted to host a temporary overflow shelter. Anything for the third? That was just it with the sub, right? Yeah, so that was the first sub. So that's what we've been looking at. Yeah.
Prior to this meeting, we had a Salt Lake County specific meeting. It's actually the third Salt Lake County specific meeting we've had in the last week since we caught wind of this fail-safe piece. Before I repeat what happened in that meeting, let me explain why this piece matters to the rest of the state. Right now, every city that does not have a homeless resource center in its boundaries, even if it's close to your boundaries, every city contributes a portion of your sales tax into what's called the Homelessness Mitigation Fund. So you contribute it, whether you're Bountiful or Eagle Mountain or Tokerville, you are contributing a portion based on your population, okay? Well, the 5 million that Molly referenced would be, for the first time, state money coming into that fund. So the fund would go from 5.7 million of city contributions to 10.7 million. So that's a big deal to finally get state ongoing money into this fund, and it would benefit homeless resource centers across the state. So it would benefit St. George's Switch Point facility, Ogden's Lantern House facility, as well as the 3 in Salt Lake County, and other smaller regional facilities that would qualify under the definition. So there's one in Logan and there's one in Cedar City that would qualify for a portion of those dollars. So now you have this $10.7 million pot. Well, what has become really abundantly clear over the last few years, since that mitigation fund was established 4 years ago, is that the current 5.7 and even now the future 10.7 is still pales in comparison to the actual fiscal impact on Ogden City, on St. George City, on Midvale, South Salt Lake, et cetera, on the homeless resource center cities. So state money will help. But there is discussion with Wayne Niederhauser, former Senate president, who was instrumental in creating the mitigation fund in the first place and is now the state homeless director, with him and his office, Representative Ellison and others, about whether to revisit, not this week, but to revisit in the year ahead, the municipal contributions to the homelessness mitigation fund. Okay, please tell me I don't have to repeat all of that. Okay, thank you. Which means that going forward after this week, regardless of what happens in House Bill 440, cities from, I already picked on Eagle Mountain, I've already picked on Bountiful. Now my eyes are gonna get tricky as I'm looking around the back, but from Mighton to Spanish Fork to, cities outside of Salt Lake County, there will be a discussion about contributions to the mitigation fund and overflow plans within your respective counties, particularly in the urban areas. So just know that's something that Wayne Niederhauser has been talking about. As we discuss the fail-safe that Molly laid out, his objective is that the fail-safe never happens in Salt Lake County, and that the cities in Salt Lake County work together over the next few months to come up with an overflow plan. And then the insurance policy of the fail-safe never triggers. But if it does, they have been looking for a combination of requiring the existing shelters to flex and take on more people and to have temporary facility outside of those cities. So before I go into the straw poll results. Okay. Are there questions about the framework of the status quo before we talk Salt Lake County specifically and impact outside of Salt Lake County? No? Okay. Okay, Mayor Walker, so microphone, please. Okay, so Mayor Walker asked if the 5 million is tied to the insurance fail-safe in Salt Lake County. If the league took a position of opposition to House Bill 440, then realistically, the $5 million goes away. Well, certainly this year, it's ongoing money, so we'd have to come back and ask for it again. But right now, Wayne Niederhauser's been a big cheerleader for the cities, because he's met with all of the cities that have homeless resource centers and the league board and committed, I'll go get more state money to put into this fund. So I think he would feel betrayed if we said, hey, actually, never mind, even though it got funded on Friday and we asked him for it. Okay, so let's go Mayor Staggs and then Brian.
I'm just curious with respect to the funding, is it just, it's COG that would determine the overflow facility, but do we have any say over how what would rise to what, 10.7 million?
So the 10.7 million would be allocated according to a formula. So it's not discretionary. That's one of the problems with the current model, is the current model of the 5.7, 60% goes to two cities by entitlement. It's guaranteed in code. The other 40% is discretionary, which means in reality, an Ogden City and a Salt Lake City compete for each other for that remaining 40%. So the 10.7 would all go into a formula, and the formula would try to track the actual impact on the cities based on number of people served and number of beds, et cetera. So then it's no longer them cities fighting amongst each other to get a reimbursement. It's, we know year in and year out, this is how much money we'll get to help offset our public safety impact. The COG, what the COG would be responsible to do is independent of the dollars. The COG would be responsible to identify an overflow plan. And if the COG does not, then right now the bill would say that Salt Lake and Midvale shelters have to flex and allow more people. And Riverton and Draper and other cities in the county run the risk of any state facility being preempted by the state to house a temporary overflow shelter. So that's what's currently on the table. So let's go Brian and then see if there are any other questions.
So
So I understand, the way the insurance policy works is, if the insurance policy is tied to the funding. So however we monkey with that could impact the level of funding we get. Do I understand that correctly?
No. So the kind of the funding, as long as we don't oppose the bill, the funding will put $5 million into the mitigation fund. And the fund goes from 5.7 to 10.7. And then the formula will kick in and the money will start to go to the cities that have resource centers. The second piece of the bill is the insurance piece of, if the cities in Salt Lake County cannot get to yes on an overflow plan, then what? And right now, the then what is the current shelters have to expand up to 50% of to 50% of the fire code. And every city in the county, including the cities with resource centers, would face the potential preemption of a state-owned facility for a homeless resource overflow.
So Salt Lake City and South Salt Lake have to put a lot of trust in the rest of us to come up with a plan to prevent the insurance policy from having to be affected. Is that
Under the
what-
current, so this is a really good point, okay? And I haven't, how many meetings now, Mayor Walker, have we had on this point? But this is it, right? If the bill were to pass as is right now, with the first substitute, that 50%, or that the current resource centers would flex and the other cities run the risk of a state facility being preempted to allow for an overflow facility. The objective from Representative Ellison is to say, I've watched the last 2 years as the cities in Salt Lake County have tried to avoid having an overflow plan. So this is forcing everyone to the table. The concern from the 3 cities with homeless resource centers is that if the default is still just expand the existing shelters, that'll be the easiest thing to happen. And it doesn't create an incentive for the other cities to figure out a plan that maybe means that a Cottonwood Heights city has to house an overflow. So really what Wayne Niederhauser and what Representative Ellison have asked is like, what's the balance to make sure everybody comes to the table to discuss the fail-safe between the flex and the preemption? And where things started in his original bill was flex to the fire code. Any building in West Jordan City could be preempted to turn into an overflow, and state facilities. He's now taken that second piece out to where he's saying it's now any state facility or flex to 50%. And the question, the question is that enough to get everybody to the table in good faith? And what we've heard from the homeless resource center cities is still a concern that even the 50% flex would still be devastating on those 3 communities in particular, ability to provide services and the public safety impacts and the like, and may not be the right balance to ensure that the other cities all come to the table of just the risk of the state facilities. Mayor, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I just want to add, for those that have not been part of these discussions that we've had in Salt Lake County, the issue of flexing the shelters or expanding their capacity beyond their conditional use allowances is a couple of things. First of all, there were some commitments made to the cities with homeless research centers that populations would not exceed a certain amount, and to flex those shelters breaches that trust. And these shelters, impose burdens upon these municipalities with respect to extra policing and lots of other issues. So they're very concerned about flexing the shelters at all, and also they're concerned that it's a slippery slope, that if they're flexed a little bit, it's easier just to flex the shelter. Why not just do that? The other problem with flexing the shelters, at least up to the fire code, or even, I'm not sure where the point is, but we had a problem before these shelters were constructed where the unsheltered were basically housed in a single facility at Rio Grande, and there was no opportunity for any kind of programming or treatment. It was just a warehousing situation, and we weren't making any kind of progress in trying to solve the problem that we have. The concern of the shelter cities is that if these shelters are flexed, at least to some degree, I think they are concerned about it at all, that that you start losing space for the treatment and programming, and then we're back to a Rio Grande situation. So that's why they're adamantly opposed against the shelters flexing. So the decision ultimately we're going to have to make on this bill is whether to oppose it, stay neutral, or support it, recognizing, I think, that the sponsor and Niederhauser are kind of aligned with respect to the fact that that they just want to make sure there's a plan for overflow, and they have expressed to us that they see flexing the shelters as an attractive alternative because the resources are already there. But I think ultimately they acknowledge that flexing gets too far, that we're back to a Rio Grande situation. They don't want to do that. But I think they're far more aggressive in flexing than some of the rest of us are thinking is a good idea.
But is there room to negotiate that flex option, or are we stuck?
So here's the balance, right? This is what I was trying to explain in our pre-meeting before for just the fail-safe. If there's no flex on the table, right? If the league says no flex, then they're going to say, okay, fine. What's the insurance policy then to ensure that there are other beds? So right now they've taken the general preemption off the table. My hunch is they'll say, okay, let's put the general preemption back in, or some type of limited preemption. So that's the balance we're trying to figure out from the cities within Salt Lake County is if we say no to the flex, then are the cities in Salt Lake County willing to absorb a greater preemption risk if you can't get to yes on an overflow plan? Okay, Mary Mendenhall.
I just want to note that the flex option in this substitute includes both summer and winter time. So it's essentially a year-round overflow shelter operation that is in the first substitute. And that the inclusion of state-owned facilities as a preemption is really a false inclusion. The state can go into any facility they want in any of our cities, and they're, as you know, not obliged to any of our zoning or conditional use processes. So including that as a threat seems really empty to Salt Lake City because they could do that yesterday in any of the facilities they own. We are asking, as the 3 host cities in the county, that the league hold off on this first substitute and give the league staff and those of us in the county. I think Ogden also spoke up in our meeting before the noon meeting started here today. Give us the chance to keep working this bill with them rather than taking a neutral, oppositional, or supportive stance at this point. And when it comes time for a motion, I'd like to make that motion.
The one thing I'll add to what Mayor Mendenhall said is this is the last chance for the policy committee to take a position. So the nuance I'll add to what Mayor Mendenhall said is you could take a position that says we will, for example, support if, and then the if kind of gives us those directions, or we will go to neutral if, or we will oppose if. That way, when we have to make the call, like we know the will of the membership as this proceeds over the next couple of days. So let's go, Mayor Burton, I saw your hand first.
I have
Mayor
just one online.
Zoltansky. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say, just for the member or benefit of people that weren't in part of our Salt Lake County meeting that we had before LPC this today. We basically took a straw poll, and I think the large majority of cities represented voted to not flex the shelters. I think there were maybe 2 cities that in Salt Lake County that felt there should be a limited flex. So, that's kind of the sentiment of the cities in Salt Lake County that are directly affected by this, I guess. And then the other thing that happened is last week, we have a in addition to our Council of Governments in Salt Lake County, we have a Conference of Mayors, which is a club basically that we meet at it as mayors. And in that body, the mayors in Salt Lake County, with all but 3 of our 17 or 18 cities represented, basically said we commit to working together to come up with an overflow plan. And that, what that means is that there's going to be 1 or more cities in Salt Lake County that are going to have an overflow shelter. But we've committed to working on that, to identify that shelter and come up with a plan that would be amenable to the Homeless Coalition in Utah and ultimately to the state homelessness office.
And before we go to Mayor Zoltansky and Mayor Burton, let me add that to piggyback on the straw poll we took before the meeting. And I know those of you outside of Salt Lake County are saying, why does this matter to me? Well, the reason it matters is the overflow discussion right now is about Salt Lake County. And over the next few months, the overflow discussion is going to be about the rest of the urban areas. Okay, so kind of whatever happens in Salt Lake County today is going to affect others going forward, either in the overflow plan or potential contributions to the mitigation fund. So we just want to be very transparent with the whole membership of what we've been hearing in these discussions so that you're aware of what could be coming. Now, Mayor Silvestrini referenced the straw poll from our pre-LPC meeting, and that's all it was a straw poll. But the sentiment was from the majority of the cities in Salt Lake County who were part of that conversation to not flex the shelters and have some alternative for the insurance policy. I've been texting, so don't grandma me, but I've been texting with the powers that be about what that could potentially look like. And this comes back to the balance of flex and the threat of preemption. So right now, what's been texted back to me is it says, if the league is willing to stand up for the cities who have homeless resource centers to say no mandatory flex as part of the insurance policy, then there's got to be a broader preemption that's on the table as the backup plan. So not just state facilities, but a broader preemption so that potentially any facility could be converted into an overflow facility if the cities in Salt Lake County can't identify a plan for overflow. And that gets to the balance here of the flex and the preemption, because what they're looking for is that insurance policy that Holiday and Sandy and South Salt Lake are all going to work together, because there's some mutually assured destruction here. And everybody's at risk if you can't come up to a plan. So I'm going to come back to what I just said in a second, because that'll be part of the vote. Please make sure you've signed in so we have an accurate count, and I'll look to my staff to make sure we know how many people are here. So I think I said Mayor Burton, then Mayor Zoltansky. That's not just alphabetical, it's just the way I saw you.
I have the mic and I'm going to ask the questions online if that's okay.
Okay.
Just,
well,
okay, so there were two quick questions. One from Kayleen Whitelock, wondering how many cities were present in the pre-LPC meeting.
the majority of the cities in Salt Lake County. And then on Thursday at the Conference of Mayors meeting, 15 of the 18 cities were there.
Awesome. And then Paul Larson was wondering, are there geographical limits to the counties outside of Salt Lake County that are affected?
So right now, no, but that's why I'm saying that be prepared, Brigham City, and be prepared, others, West Point and others, that there will be a dialogue about the role of other cities and frankly, other counties, because you have other counties that aren't stepping up and doing what they need to do as well. And one thing we've heard over and over and over again is, where is the state's plan on homelessness? And we've been driving that point home as well. Is there needs to be a better coordinated state strategic plan here. And there is a strategic plan in place. It's just slowly being implemented. Mayor Caldwell, Mayor Wood, Mayor Mendenhall, Mayor Randall in St. George, and Mayor Stevenson of Midvale all represent the league on the State Homeless Council, which is trying to figure out how to implement the strategic plan. And so know that we've advocated to make sure there are city voices in the room as these state level decisions are being made. It really comes down to what position do we want to take on 440. So Burton, Zoltansky, and then recognizing running short on time, Mayor.
Thank you. So a couple of comments, then the question. The first comment is Mayor Mendenhall is right. If the state wants to do it, they can do it regardless of what we have to say.
On the
But
state facilities, yes.
Yes, but I appreciate them coming to us and giving us other opportunities first first of all. Second thing is, West Jordan doesn't have a shelter within its city. Well, not a homeless shelter like this. However, we're next door to a neighbor who does, and what happens to them also affects us as well. I don't want to see them having to double their population. I think that's not fair to the Midvale. I don't think that's fair to West Jordan. I don't think it's fair to the residents. So we need to keep that where it's under control. So and I think the money they've been getting is short. The fact that there's an opportunity to get $5 million, I'm very excited about that. The fact that $5 million is coming from the state, I'm very excited about that. I don't want to lose that 5 million. So if we can find a way to keep that 5 million and go forward, I think that's really important. I would be willing to let and our meeting with COM, as you talked about, we were there and we were one of those that supported the idea of the county finding a way to take this load off so the other shelters don't have to do the flexing. And I'm still willing to do that. But I think whatever we do, we have to make sure we don't lose that 5 million, because I think 5 million over 1 year is a big deal.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Let's go Mayor Zoltansky, and then if there are no other comments, I'll summarize where I think we're at.
Thank you. So 5 million, yes, that's a game changer, and losing local control would also be a game changer. So for that reason, I do support something in a flex light or discussion, continuing that, because I feel like we have way too much to lose if we just come back and say, no, we are united in our resistance. So being practical and looking at the impact to the cities, if each city had to respond and create some overflow program, 1 year to the next, we're taking a shotgun approach. It's not just the unsheltered population, it's the service providers that I'm thinking about, and where the efficiencies of service and where the consolidation of service lies. So what about proposing something counter rather than a 50% capacity of the fire code? What about 20% or 10 to 20% capacity of their current capacity? So that's easier to absorb and easier to plan for, frankly, from year to year. And then if that's not enough, then it would trigger, okay, individual cities may have to rotate on a yearly basis to come up with an overflow program. But I think looking at the numbers and what I'm hearing, then that's been part of the problem, frankly, is we haven't had the population numbers and what really, the need is. And I think it's more of a wintertime than a summertime problem. But if we were within 20% of the current capacity, I think that'd be much more palatable and much more efficient to plan from year to year. So that's why, Sandy, we're supporting something in the flex discussion. Thanks.
So to just make sure we're on the same page, flex discussion with some preemption or flex with no preemption? Flex with no preemption. Okay. Mayor Wood?
I would like to second Mayor Mendenhall's motion that we ask the LPC to vote and remain open on this so we can continue this dialogue.
So that would be taking, at this point, are we saying support if, neutral if, or oppose if, or just we're not taking a position yet, recognizing this is our last chance to officially take a position?
We would ask for support to continue this dialogue, understanding where most cities sit. I'm wondering if, Cam, you think that we should do either in the form of a straw poll or an official motion, to get some guidance from the group on the flex, no flex fundamental question here.
Well, and that's why I'm coming back to the flex preemption balance, is in our straw poll before, we talked about the flex piece, and I had several cities come up to me afterward and say, if it's no flex, what does that mean for my city? And the answer is, then if there's no flex, then what they will say is there has to be some level of preemption that is in the fail-safe in order to balance, basically in order to balance it out. Because what Wayne Niederhauser wants is an insurance policy that if we can't come up with a plan in Salt Lake County, then this triggers. So I agree. I'm happy to do the straw poll in a second. But Mayor, it sounds like we have a motion, but I also saw a hand here with Mayor Walker.
I'll just reiterate that the flex is a preemption. It's in our zoning and it's in our conditional use, that capacity will not be exceeded. So it is in and of itself already a preemption.
Okay, so the other aspect of preemption that the sponsor and Mr. Niederhauser, President Niederhauser, have been talking about is, in addition to state facilities, any storefront in any city in Salt Lake County could be used if it were identified and supported by the Homeless Coalition, and that the host city would be preempted with respect to any opposition to that.
It's all preemption, right? I mean, we don't want to be California, but man, we're running to California like we can't get there quick enough. We're negotiating against ourselves with this money. It's $5 million, right? We are the ones that proposed it. So if we go back and say, take a hard line and they take the money, well, I'm not for that. I think what we kind of talked about at the comm meeting makes some sense. Flexible or a percentage in the flex, no summertime. I mean, I don't know where that came from. That happened after we had our meeting. I mean, I don't think it should be summertime. It should be to solve temperature, the things they originally were talking about. When it's cold, place so people aren't dying outside. So some percentage of flex, no summertime. We all pay a little bit more money, but if they're going to do the preemption, the negotiated preemption I'd like to see is not any building they pick, like we talked about in comm, hotels or motels that make sense they can go pick, but not just anywhere. Those facilities are a little easier for them to, they're set up to take people, they're set up to house people, they're in places where they have parking, that kind of, that I'm for that type of a negotiation with respect to it. I mean, I think we're going to get some preemption no matter what. We already have, we always are. But if we can negotiate the preemption in a way that we can live with it, that's my proposal, is that we do come up with a percentage on the flex, no summertime. We all pay some more money. And when the state does go preempt, if we can't all agree on a place, that it's a hotel or a motel and it's not just any building they pick.
So to summarize that, that would be a partial flex and then more of a preemption than the state preemption, but not as far as, or preemption of state facilities, but not as far as the general preemption. And what I'm being told is that if the answer is no to the flex, that they're going to want a bigger preemption as the insurance policy if it's no to the flex. Because anyway, let's come back. Councilman.
Cameron, I have a question. If we say no flex, right? Or if we say, let's have a little bit of a flex and, sorry, Rosalba from Murray City and Sandy or Murray or Cottonwood or whichever city is then now targeted to have an overflow situation, we could potentially look at be put in a situation that Salt Lake's in, correct? Is that kind of where we're at? We just don't know. And then what would funding look like then?
Right, all good points. So on the fail safe, if, like, let's say before we get to the fail safe, if the COG comes together and the COG identifies a site in Murray City that would work for an overflow facility, and that's done voluntarily, the insurance policy never kicks in. But if the COG does not, and the state says this facility in Murray City checks the boxes for an overflow, then Murray City would have to allow the overflow under a general preemption. Under the limited preemption that Mayor Walker was indicating, it may be that certain properties would be preempted, but certain other ones wouldn't. There would be money from this 5 million that's set aside to reimburse overflow facilities, recognizing that they would have a public safety impact. So there's that piece. And then the big question on everybody's mind is what happens to the potential overflow in the future? Does it become a future permanent shelter or not? So we've been working on different potential conditions that could say, if Cameron City gets preempted, whether it's limited or general, then the overflow can only be in the city once every 5 years. And it has to be in a hotel, motel, or certain conditions like that where the preemption would kick in. So that's what we've termed the limited preemption. So let's go, Councilmember Dugan. Is there anybody else online, Liam? Because we do need to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Thank you for the discussion. We have all this, it's preemption or really nothing right now. So I like the idea that the COG makes a choice here. We make a decision. And if you want the preemption without including cities with HRCs. That puts it back on the COG's face to, hey, you guys might got to make a decision. And if you don't make the decision, the state can preempt you, and we're excluding the cities with the HRCs because they already have the burden of the HRCs in their cities.
So Councilmember, you were saying preempt the cities without preempt the cities without HRCs for any property. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, whether it's the flex is, there is no flex there because they don't have an HRC. So it's just state preemption which is what the flex is already. So preemption, state preemption, excluding HRC cities
And no flex.
and no flex.
Yeah, I think that really is the bottom line for us to consider is if we take a position that we oppose a flex, then they're going to expect some type of preemption to offset that. Yeah, and the straw poll before the meeting was that the majority of the cities in Salt Lake County were comfortable with taking that position of no flex. And so we just need to be clear about what that means. Let's go, Mayor Dowling.
Just to clarify, Cameron, I think it's being communicated a little bit if we vote for no flex that the $5 million is going to be at risk. And that's not my understanding. It's just that you're going to have to go to the second option in terms of preemption. So if
Right,
we say
yep.
no flex, it doesn't mean that we're not going to get
Correct.
the $5 million. So
Yep.
I would be more interested in a hybrid option that Mayor Walker's talking about, where we say no flex, but can we negotiate a little bit on what that preemption is going to be, have a little bit of flexibility in terms of how far that can go, which is, I think, what Mayor Mendenhall was alluding to is let's vote for the no flex, but give the league an opportunity to go back and say, give us a little bit more latitude in what that preemption is going to be, because I agree with you, we're going to get preemption no matter what. And that's what I would support.
So we already have a motion on the floor. So is that,
Make that motion.
so it'd be a substitute motion then to, and the second, Mayor Wood, okay. Hold on. You're,
I could either accept your substitute. I'll make the motion that the existing HR cities in Salt Lake County be exempted from Plan B preemption, and that we resist the flex option entirely and give the league staff the bandwidth to negotiate on what the Plan B preemptions might be in the other cities in Salt Lake County. Is that accurate to what you were getting at also? Thank you.
so, yeah, go ahead.
So we'll treat that as a substitute motion. And so I don't know if I can restate it altogether. Does anybody have any questions about the motion?
I wrote it down, so I can.
Okay.
restate it. I wrote it down.
All right. Is there discussion to the motion?
Let me-
All right.
Yep, nope, that's fine. That's why I wrote it down. So the motion on the table. So let's take a step back and do a big picture about the first piece of it, because I'm still unclear if the ask is to support or go neutral on the bill. We clearly support the dollars coming in, right? The second piece would be a precedent of preemption. And, you know, as I've just been listening to the discussion here, and even the feedback from Thursday's meeting and today's meeting, by a quick show of hands, how many people are comfortable with any type of preemption period? Put my hand down, right? So,
Comfortable with it? That's not the right.
yeah, but that's kind of the point. So it may make the most sense to say, to clarify, we support the dollars, but we are working toward neutral on the fail-safe piece, rather than saying we support the fail-safe because this fail-safe has a preemption. It's either preemption of 3 cities or it's a preemption of everybody else. And think about the precedent of what that means going forward. So Mayor Mendenhall, you're the one who made the motion. My thinking, recognizing it's 1:45 and we've gone over, that the motion to clarify would be the league is working toward basically support on the first half, neutrality on the second half, which would mean a default position of neutral on the bill. Yeah.
Kate Bradshaw, Bountiful. Is it neutral, or is it leave the position open so you can negotiate, or which
What I'm saying is working toward neutral. Like, this is how we get to neutral, is if we can work out these conditions.
The way I've understood the motion was obviously wanting the league staff to stay engaged in the negotiations. So is neutral, is that what that interpretation is then for you from the staff perspective?
Yes, that we would still be engaged because we're not taking a position of opposition to the bill.
feel like you need to restate all of this again. I'm still confused.
Right, okay. So the motion on the table is separate from what Mayor Walker had brought up, because he brought that up as a concept. It would be that the way to get the league's neutrality on the fail-safe piece would be no flex on the existing shelters and a state preemption of all of the other cities in Salt Lake County for a homeless resource. Okay, no, Mayor, I see you. I know, yeah, I was getting that. All of the other cities in Salt Lake County. So essentially what it would be saying would be the direction to staff would be no on the flex and figure out a preemption that the cities in Salt Lake County could live with as an insurance policy that is focused on the 15 cities that do not have homeless resource centers. So I'm going to repeat that again, okay? Because that is the motion on the table. And again, you need 60% of present LPC voters to pass. That, well, so then, yeah, that's a good point, okay? So in Mayor Walker's comments he mentioned before about the no summer flex, it's got to be just the overflow for flex. And we'd also been working on a sunset provision, because let's be honest, this is a terrible way to set homelessness policy, with all due respect to everyone who's contributed, right? This is terrible. So sunsetting this after a year, say this is forcing everybody to the table for a year, then the fail-safe sunsets, and we, as part of the COG process, figure out a better approach than this mutually assured destruction that's currently in House Bill 440. So it'd be without the summer piece and with some sort of sunset. And I think what we heard loud and clear from the COM last week was a no on the general preemption. So this would be the general preemption. And so, yeah, I'm going to, because right now, so what the COM said loud and clear last week was no on the general preemption, which is why you made the recommendation you did. The motion on the floor would be general preemption for the cities outside of the 3 cities with homeless resource centers and no flex, but with a sunset and take that summer language out. So we're really talking about next winter, okay? When we ask for a vote, it's just for LPC voting members. If we don't get to 60%, then we'll be back to another motion to give us the marching orders. Okay, so Roger's clarifying that you can actually do this one with 50% rather than 60% because you're giving the framework as opposed to taking the official action on the bill because it's the negotiating piece. So that's good to know. Now, one caveat I'll say is, again, this is the last time the LPC is meeting. So over the last week and a half, how many conversations, Mayors Ramsey and Silvestrini, have we had on homelessness? At least 5, right? There'll be a lot of dialogue over these next few days. So the other thing is, I would ask the LPC to essentially deputize, which you already do. You deputize the officers to make decisions per our bylaws in between LPC meetings. So recognize that we will be coordinating with the LPC, with your officers, but this is more than just officers. We will make sure to get as much feedback from the Salt Lake County cities as possible, particularly the big 3 and the cities that have, I'll basically have a new board for the week. That's the homeless resource center cities, Salt Lake County cities, and the officers. Holy smokes.
Is that clear as mud?
Yeah, I'm going to restate the motion again here. Okay, I know. Okay, no flex. Okay, so the shelters in Salt Lake County do not flex. The state would preempt cities that do not have homeless resource centers. If we don't come up with a plan, there'd be no summer. We have a sunset. So this comes off the table at the end of the year, and hopefully we have a better process. And then staff has the bandwidth to negotiate the conditions of what that general preemption would look like. Sure, but I just summed it. So I hope
Yes,
people
the
don't forget.
sum is great with Great respect to my colleague from Draper. I think there's a 0% chance summer's going to come off the table. They're pretty firm on that. And none of us knew that till Friday. We had calm on Thursday. Friday is when they told us about the summer. I don't think they're moving on that. That's just my guess.
This is the art of negotiation, right? We'll figure it out.
If the motion is general preemption, the one last point I want to make about that is I'd rather have preemption than negotiate than general. And so if we're going to say that the Homeless Resource Center cities don't get any more and it goes out, to the other 15 cities, I want it negotiated preemption. I want to know what I'm getting, the hotel motel thing. I don't want them to have the carte blanche. They could go in any storefront. It could go in a bigger home. It could go wherever they want. So, like I said, we're getting some preemption up here. That's the way it works, but I'd like to know what it is. So that's my last point.
So, and I think that just depends on what we propose. If you got a motel, you propose it.
But we need, see, this concept of us cities coming up with a plan, everyone's gonna love it. I'm gonna just be on the record with you. I tried that offer of compassionate homeless shelters placement. And I just want to be really clear with you, it was not fun. And it was, and I know it's, if you weren't there, come talk to me after. But the concept of us all coming to a plan and then some residents in those city going, oh, that's great, we're gonna get the homeless shelter overflow. It's not gonna happen. Whereas if the state comes in and preempts us, it might be preemption we like in this sense, but I'd like to control what they can preempt.
Do I need to restate the motion or are people comfortable? Yeah. I've only done it 4 times.
All in
Okay.
favor of the motion?
Yep, right. So raise your hands in the room so we can count. What's our, I need to see what our number is. Well, I guess it's 50%. So Liam will do it online. Justin, you go this side.
Seventeen.
Okay, all those opposed? Sorry. Online?
Yeah, let's. Murray math didn't help, but that's okay. So while we wait for Liam to calculate, I would be remiss if I let the last LPC end without thanking the league staff for the countless hours on weekdays and weekends, the late night phone calls, all of the work. This was the first legislative session for league staffers, Justin Lee, as a league member. He's been up here for over a decade, but he's been a phenomenal advocate for local governments. It's Molly Wheeler, our policy directors, her first legislative session with the league. Liam Threlkill's first legislative session with the league. Hannah, our intern, her first session. So yes, you've seen a lot of me. You've seen a lot of Roger and John, but thank you. And thank you to Carson and Meg. We basically took our entire staff this session, except for a couple of people, and dedicated them to the legislature in some form or fashion because we knew how many big issues were coming. So thank you for your support and advocacy within the league. And thank you to the team for your tremendous efforts. Liam and Carson, do you guys, oh, and then Rachel Terry, our deputy director who joined us halfway through the session. So that's my point. We've been staffing up like crazy for all the big issues that were coming. So thank you. Liam and Carson, do you have a number for us? Okay, so in that case, while you guys count that up, we're going to count the no votes in the room. So if you are a no on that motion, raise your hand. So no, put them high. I'm doing it in the back too.
Sure, yeah, really quick. While we're waiting, secondary water, which I know Another really simple subject. The only real update, well, there's two updates. One, if you saw the budget numbers, they did put $200 million in for secondary water metering. I think that was the biggest single item on the budget. So the funding looks like that will be secured. That's a big thing. That's a good thing. Second part is we also expect to see a substitute come out anytime. Your guess is as good as mine. Well, my guess might be slightly better, but there will be some slight exemption, it looks like, for smaller water providers. But what that exactly looks like, I don't really know. So we'll see what that looks like in the next couple of days and where that goes. But thank you for everyone who reached out to their legislators on that. Reaching out to your legislators made a big difference in make sure that funding, one, got secured, and two, if we see any kind of substitute or exemptions or carve outs or whatever that looks like. So thank you on that. That's really the update on secondary water. So waiting, if not, we can make up other updates. Not made up, but we have other updates. So do Garrity real quick. Yeah, you can do yours.
I won't share my cold with you. So there are two bills that I'm going to talk about briefly. 399, that's our Garrity Bill that we've talked about every time I've been here. So we anticipate there'll be a vote on it in the Senate this week, and we think there's a lot of strong support for it. So we think it should go through, but continue to remind your senators why we support it, why it's important to your communities and your constituents. Should I just skip to 476?
Yeah, you just skip that.
All right, so let me just skip to House Bill 476. It was heard in the Natural Resources Committee today. Since we've talked about the easy stuff, homelessness, blah, 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 transportation, let's talk about livestock regulations. This is the hard stuff. The bill provides that the state and not political subdivisions, so counties and cities, cannot regulate any agricultural enterprise. That includes, it's any commercial enterprise that involves animals and animal byproducts. So that's pet stores, rodeos, exhibitions, everything, horse-drawn carriages. So the bill is written fairly broadly so that it provides, you cannot regulate anything that involves a commercial animal enterprise. And we have not taken a position on that yet.
Correct.
That's right.
Yeah, that's cities and counties.
Only the state.
So the vote on House Bill 440 on homelessness services, the motion passed 61 to 13.
Well, come on. Yeah. So yeah, quick. So Rachel, if you want to finish, what's our recommended position on 476? Yes.
All those, did you say all
I
those
think
in-
we have like a fourth at this point.
All
So
right, all in favor? Any opposed?
Okay.
beautiful. And I think we already have.
All right,
positions on
so
this one.
otherwise, other than what we voted on, I'll entertain a general motion to ratify the league's positions on the bill tracker.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. In a second. Thanks, Gary. All right, all in favor? Aye.
And then
Any opposed?
Liam, do you
Okay,
want
that
to run
carries.
really quick and talk? Anything on appropriations? If you need to go, great, but we're going to do a quick update on appropriations from Liam.
Take my number.
Jeez. Okay. There's not too much to say in here. I'll make it quick. I'd want to note the local match program that is in part of round 2 of the local match that happened through GOPB last time. This local match, it's 25 million. It was asked for 100 million in the governor's budget, but it's 25 million funded. It'll be through GOEO. It is also only limited to housing and water projects now. So it won't be the entire scope that's eligible under ARPA. It'll just be housing and water. And counties of the first and second class are not eligible for that. And let's see. Then, like Justin said, the 200 million for secondary watering was in there. And then the Utah Lake Authority bill had 1.5 million of ongoing. And then, yeah, you can see the housing projects are all included here. I don't know if there's anything anybody else want to go into detail to on that, but yep.
I think that's it. Motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience today.
On that one? Got it?